Hi, this is Nahid. This is a presentation that goes over one of the assessments that I use quite a bit with clients who are looking to discover maybe what their core strengths are, what makes them happy, maybe what direction they should go in next for a career, or even if they're thinking about doing maybe a life purpose statement. So when you're feeling a little fuzzy about who you are, this is a great assessment to start with. It actually follows several steps, and the first step is a list of proudest moments. Now, essentially what I'm going to ask you to do is to think back in your life to moments where you felt really proud of yourself, really happy, really, what I'm going to say, in your element. You were maybe proud and happy at the same time. Now, I tend to customize this exercise for everyone who comes to me. And everyone who comes to me has a little bit of a different thing that they want to get out of it. So, for example, sometimes I use this exercise for clients who want to negotiate a raise. And in their case, they're going to be looking very specifically for moments that they were proud on the job that they were currently in. However, sometimes I might have clients who are looking to discover what their core values are or what their purpose in life are. And in that case, I'm going to have them expand this exercise and look throughout their whole life to maybe moments where they felt the most happy and fulfilled or the most purposeful. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to get out of it, how you define the types of moments that you're going to look for. The exercise itself follows one simple concept, and that concept is we go back into our past and look at our past life, because our past life is actually the best predictor of our future life, and it's also the best way to understand who we really are in the world. So today, I'm going to walk you through the exercise in a very generalized way, and hopefully you'll get a sense of it, and then you'll probably get a lot out of it just doing it in a general way, but then when you get into a situation where you want to apply it specifically to something that you're trying to figure out, you'll be able to use it for that too. So here is the process that you follow. First, you come up with a bulleted list of moments, and for the purposes of this presentation, we'll just say moments when you felt proud of yourself and happy. You were actually enjoying yourself while you felt proud. You weren't proud just because you got through something you hated doing. The moments can be just a few minutes in time, or they can span over a greater period. So I have some examples, and a great way to think of this is just a bulleted list of that time when X, insert the blank. Typically 7 to 15 moments are going to be fine. If you're using this in a career situation where you want to define a new career and ultimately do a resume and interview for a new job, you might want to come up with a few more moments, because there are a lot of uses for these moments, this list of moments when you're done for them. For example, you can use them for examples in interviews that you go on, and you want maybe to come to an interview armed with 20 to 25 examples of times when you were in your element. So this is a great exercise to use to get started with that process as well. But for now, and while you're watching this presentation, I would say just off the top of your head, maybe 3 to 5 moments. If you can come up with 7, that's great. But just maybe jot them down on a piece of paper. And I'll give you some examples. These are examples of my moments. So the time when I was giving that presentation and the client challenged me in front of upper management and I handled it beautifully. The time when I got the whole team together and completed a project in 2 weeks that by all rights should have taken 3 months. Now keep in mind that I'm not putting a lot of details here. I'm only saying that time when and inserting the blank. The details will come later in a later step in this process. The time when I took a month off work to drive my kids around the United States all by myself. The model of obstacles and several other models I have developed to make concepts understandable. Now notice here, even though it's a moment, what I'm talking about is several models that I have developed, because what I'm proud of is the fact that I develop models. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just one model. It's sort of all the models I develop. So you can do your moments to something that, for example, spans a month or several years, like getting a certain degree, or in my case, I took a whole month off, so it's a trip that lasted a month. Or it could be something that you did repeatedly, not just something you did one time. So, but it's still very simple and easy to describe, something that you were proud of. So you want to get a bulleted list. Again, for the purposes of this presentation, I would say if you can get up to 7, that's great, but even 3 is fine. Okay, so here's a time when you might want to pause the video to just make sure you have a full list. Now I'm assuming that you have your list of proudest moments complete, and we're going to go to the second part of the process, which is writing in my element stories out of those proudest moments. There are several things you need to keep in the stories, but keep in mind that keep in mind that when I ask you to write a story, I'm not asking you to write a 3 or 4 page story about every single bullet. So if you have 20 bullets there, don't panic. A lot of people will just answer the question. So I have the things that you need to include in the story written here as bullets, and they'll just bulletize out the questions. But for some people, it's more fun to tell a story about the situation. And you can write a story, but keep it to about a paragraph, or you can tell a story into some audio recording advice. It doesn't matter. You just need to have a story about each of your moments. And the story needs to include a few things. So here are the things that it needs to include. Number 1, the situation or the challenge that you were facing. It might not have been a challenge. It might not just have been something that you arbitrarily decided that you wanted to do. But whatever context, you need to describe it. The goal you were trying to achieve or the problem you were trying to solve. So what you wanted out of it. What you thought, how you felt, what you did. What happened as a result, and what value it had. Now, if it's a business situation, it could be the value to the organization. If it's a personal situation, or if it's a personal moment, it could be the value it had to you, or it could be the value you had to your church group, or it could be the value it had to your family, or it could be the value it had to the world. So what value it had is just what value did it have, and whatever the context is will tell you to whom the value goes to. So you're writing these facts about each story, but then you're also going to write what was it that got that moment on the list compared to many other moments in your life that may not have gotten on the list. So what was the thing that made it a moment? What was the thing that you were really the most proud of, or the thing that really made you happy, or why this moment matters compared to others? So you want to add that to it as well. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So one of the moments on my list was the time when I was giving the presentation and the client challenged me. So here's the context. The situation or challenge was that I was one of several presenters who were lined up to present to these international clients who had visited our company. But when I went up and started talking about some of the products that we developed, one of the clients raised his hand and complained about something that was a product issue. It was probably an issue that he had on his mind. And I had witnessed him complaining about things in prior presentations, and you could tell that he was kind of grumpy. And so one option I had was to try to get back to the main topic of my presentation, because if I tried to answer his question, he would have taken me off on a tangent and I wouldn't be able to finish my presentation. But I wanted to present our company in a really positive light, and I didn't like the fact that the client was complaining. And the other thing that happened was that I happened to understand what he was complaining about, and I knew the answer to his question, and I thought I could explain it pretty well. So I bagged my presentation and I addressed his issue. And the result was that he was really happy. And in addition to him being really happy, I think what made this really important to me was that there were people in the room and I was in front of a big audience, and many of the people in the audience were people who would normally intimidate me. So for example, the owner of our company was there. The CFO, who I hadn't really interacted at all with very often, was there. And many of these international clients who were very important to our business were there, and I didn't know any of them very well. So that was one of the things that made it important to me. What value did it have to the organization? Well, the explanation I gave him justified our higher pricing. So we were priced higher than our competition, and he was complaining about it. And my explanation completely justified why we did things the way we did. And he was happy. The what made it a moment part is really important here, because in my case, it could have been about the technology. But what it was about, it could have been about the profitability. It could have been about the bigwigs seeing me in a certain light. And it was a little bit about all of those things. But when I think about it, it was really that I was able to stay calm when challenged in front of other people. And also that the information came to me. And I was able to bag my presentation and essentially improvise and do an excellent job and still speak articulately and clearly in front of all these people and not lose my cool. So that was one of the things that made it a moment for me. I want to give you a second example that's not business related at all. This example is taking a month off work to drive my kids around the United States all by myself. Here the context was that I had established my business, but I felt like I was keeping my kids in daycare longer than I had planned. And they were in after-school daycare programs, but here I had started my business so that I could be a mom. So now that I felt like I was no longer in survival mode, I decided to take a month off my business and travel around the country with my kids and take them out of daycare. And I did that, and it was really, really fun. Part of how I did it was planning for things like making sure I had contingencies where I could only drive during the day and in short stints because I had small children with me, and I also didn't want the car to break down and be stranded in the dark in some remote location of the United States. So it was a really complicated process, and everybody thought I was crazy, but I did it, and it worked beautifully, and it was a great trip. The value it had was value to me. It gave me confidence, and when I really did my reflection of what made it a moment was that it changed me. I felt free and alive, more confident than ever before, and I think what it was for me was that I realized here I was creating my life exactly the way I wanted to create it, and nothing was really holding me back. So you're going to do stories like that for all of your moments. And once you have 5, 7, 10, 15 moments, and you start looking at your stories, you're going to notice that they have certain things in common. And this is the exciting part. So writing the stories is the work part, but then looking at them and finding what they have in common is the real exciting part. Some things that you might want to ask yourself: what shows up over and over again about what you did? Because the actions that you were taking over and over again, maybe more frequently than in other times of your life, tend to point to your natural strengths, and that's how you discover your strengths. What shows up over and over in terms of what really made you happy, that tends to point to your values, your core values. How did you relate to others? What roles did you take on consistently? That may speak to your favorite social style. So for example, I tended to take a leadership role or create something by myself, but I was normally taking the initiative in the situations that I was in. Do you notice any other values or themes that show up consistently? So when I analyzed my stories, one of the things I did, So I want to apologize for that little interruption. I'm recording in a place that has a little bit of background noise, so I'm not going to be able to have a completely high quality audio yet until I learn how to do it better. Where we were when we left off was that I was talking about what I got out of my moments and what they had in common. And what was really exciting for me is I noticed how I tended to create things that didn't exist, that weren't planned or expected. So for example, when I was giving the presentation, I bagged my presentation and I improvised, and my presentation was being created as I was standing there. When I did my trip, it felt like I created my whole trip. So I actually felt like over and over again in my life, I felt the best when I was creating something and when I was standing for this idea that I can have my life however I want, and I don't have to do the traditional expected or conventional thing. I can create my own models and they work. I can take a month off work. I can manage my own time and it works, and that's really exciting to me. So here's a time for you to maybe take a couple of minutes and contemplate what you're learning as you're going through your stories. You may want to pause the recording and just take a look at your analysis and think about the gems that you're getting out of this. And if you're in the Aspyrre group coaching program, you will have an opportunity to listen to this recording along with the people who are on the call sharing their gems. And so you'll get a little bit of interaction and you'll get to hear what other people learned as well. Now, once you get the core themes, a big question is, well, what do I do from here? The important thing that you should know is that you're not going to get any tangible answers. So, for example, if you were looking for career direction, you're not going to get what kind of job should I have. But what you are going to get are these things have to exist in a job for me to be happy. So, for example, if I was doing this exercise for career clarification, what I would come up with is, well, my job needs to, whatever job I have to be free to manage my own time, and I have to be able to create, and I have to be able to improvise. So it has to be the kind of environment where I can create my own way of doing things and develop my own plans, and I'm not required to stick to doing something the same way over and over again. Well, I happen to already know myself well enough to know that that is the case. I've never been able to do a training the same way over and over and over again. But I'm lucky because I run my own company, so I do get to create it. So I am in an ideal job for myself. When you know the parameters of what you need for an ideal job, it's easier to then look at jobs and ask yourself, does this job fit my parameters? And when you're working through the job transition process, the next step after this is to go out and talk to people and see if you can find some examples of jobs that meet your parameters. And we may talk more about that in another class or in another presentation, but I do have several handouts already that explain how to do that. Okay, the most important thing to remember is this exercise doesn't have any clear rules, so don't get tripped up on, well, how am I supposed to analyze this, and what are the questions I'm supposed to answer about all my stories, and how do I get from my stories to my core parameters, and what's the right answer? I took this exercise from Richard Bowles, who wrote the book, What Color is Your Parachute? And he writes a revision to this book very frequently. His team revises the book and updates it according to the current job market. So when I read his book, it was way back in the 1990s, early, probably 1990 or 1991, and he had an exercise in the book at the time called the 7 Stories exercise. I found that to be the most excellent assessment in terms of what were my strengths that compared to anything else that I've ever taken. So I've adapted that exercise, and this process that I'm taking you through really comes from him, so I want to give him a shout out. There are other career assessments out there, but none of them, I feel, really gives you as much insight into yourself, and I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. Now, of course, the second part of the question is well, what jobs are out there? There are steps you can take to get to that. I hope you enjoyed the exercise. I hope you feel like you've got some great insights. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can send me your questions via email, or if you're in the Aspyrre group program, get on a call and ask them. I'm sure several other people have the questions, and they would love to hear the answers. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.